Welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Phil Picardi. I am a friend of Cleo's, and I edit a magazine called Playboy, which is a long story that we won't get into. More importantly, I will be your moderator for this evening. So a few reminders before we get started. Tonight's program is being recorded, so we kindly ask that you silence your cell phones for the duration of our program. I also know, as Cleo's dear friend, she will greatly appreciate, above all, you guys being present with us, but she does look amazing, so get your pictures out when she comes on stage at first. If you have any questions for Cleo, please fill them out on the cards that were on your seats or through the chat on YouTube, which I assume people are watching on YouTube, so please feel free to submit your questions. I will be handed them at some point during the night and we'll be able to ask them of Cleo, if they're good. Before we bring out our girl, we have a very special guest who will be setting the stage by reading a poem from In a World of Sunrises. Does everyone have their copy? Very nice, thank you. She is the founder and CEO of McMullen, the luxury fashion boutique now based in San Francisco. In 2024, she was recognized as a Vogue Business 100 champion. Give it up for your hometown hero, Sherry McMullen.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So happy to be with you today and to welcome our dear friend, Cleo Wade. There were so many gems in this. I actually just got the book about a week and a half ago, but there are so many gems in here, and it was really hard for me to find one thing that was resonating with me. There were so many things that were resonating with me, but this is one that's speaking to me right now, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's day 9. It's about manifestation. Manifestation is not a genie granting a wish or a thought that magically becomes reality without effort. It is the practice of visualizing yourself at your finish line as you work toward it. It is the steadfast belief that you will reach your destination, no matter what comes up. This mindset will always move you closer to having what is in your heart. It certainly will never lead you farther away. And this really resonated with me because of things that are going on in my life right now. And, you know, so much of it is about my business and my world and being a mom. But this particular one resonated because I'm going through a time where my business is turning 19 years old. And I remember when I was starting my company and I was looking for the space, the perfect space. And I found that space and I walked into it. And this was 19 years ago. I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. I was like, I know I'm going to open a business. But I went into that space and I started looking around and I started envisioning what my company would be. And I started manifesting McMullen and what it would be and what I could create. And every store after that, it was the same story. I would walk into the space and I would know it was mine and I would claim it. And I would say, this is my space. And it became my space. And so here we are 19 years later, and I have a new baby coming up. And I walked into that same space and I said, this is my space. And so it's important to know that your mind is so powerful in really thinking about what is yours and claiming it to be yours. It can be. Thank you. So excited to welcome my dear friend Cleo and Phil.
It's just me. I'm going to introduce Cleo. I don't need that.
Okay.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Give
Thank
it up for
you.
Sherry.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I have the job of introducing Cleo now. Thank you so much, Sherry. And you'll have to forgive me for relishing in this moment to introduce Cleo. It's rare that I actually get to have like a moment of earnest praise with Cleo because our friendship dynamic is more of a big sister and a little brother, except I'm her white brother, so it means I'm the more annoying one that she has to bully. And most days, Cleo does bully me. And I do gladly accept her bullying because it validates my need for her attention and approval. And if this sounds toxic, don't worry, I am working through it in therapy. The only catch to that is that Cleo assigned me my therapist because she told me I really needed the help. She was right. So now that I finally get to hold Cleo hostage backstage in this moment of beautiful celebration for a beautiful book that she's gifted to the world, dedicated to her 3 daughters who I've already indoctrinated into worshiping Britney Spears, I would like to reflect briefly on this incredible woman and the incredible gift she has given us with In a World of Sunrises. Recently, I got a new job that necessitates my moving to Miami. When I signed the paperwork, I cried, not because I'm moving to Florida, which is bad enough, trust me, but because I love the home I have made in Los Angeles so much. And when I closed my eyes to really just let the tears fall down my face, the images of home came to me. And most of them were actually from the inside of Cleo's home. The Thanksgiving dinner she invited me to when I couldn't fathom the strife between myself and my family, the chasing of her daughters around her living room, the sun pouring in through the kitchen on the mornings I reached for cold brew and she brewed her tea. In day 46 of this book, Cleo names friendship, correctly I think, as a divine refuge. There is no better term for what she has offered to me and what I hope I can one day offer in return. When our worlds come crumbling down, we, grown adults, if we are lucky to have one, still have a tendency to run home. For the past 6 years, I have run to Cleo's. When the ring came off my finger, when the rebound finally ran its course, and each time it felt like life had done its worst, she was there with a bed to sleep in, a glass of red wine to cry into, and a child or 2, now 3, to snap me out of my sadness because there were more urgent things to be done, like play princess, I'm the dragon. The passages in this book are therefore deeply familiar to me. I have heard these thoughts, or these passages really, at various stages of their development. They were medicine and meditations given to me when I needed to hear them, which is precisely actually when I did not want to hear them. Now, after they've been whispered to crying friends, and I'm sure her crying children, Cleo has been generous enough to gift them to all of you. Mary Oliver once wrote in Devotions, "I will write my poem, but I will leave room for the world." Too few of our world's current roster of our most brilliant minds are genuinely able to do both. Algorithms poison us, artificial intelligence tempts us with frictionless automation, and the bloodthirst of clicks and audience prioritize bait over beauty. Instead of joining them, which trust me, she very well could have, Cleo calls to us from the sunshine. She invites you into her house with her cup of tea or a glass of wine, your choice, and she urges you to sit down, or dance, or share, or listen. When we open her books, we are all welcome in Cleo's home. We are all friends. And let me tell you, from her close friend to her reader friends, what a divine gift her friendship is. Please join me in giving a round of applause for the New York Times bestselling author and our friend, the poet Cleo Wade.
No, I'm crying.
She's not crying. She's lying. Are you here or am I
Okay,
here?
I don't know.
You pick.
I don't have a side.
I don't either.
I bet you do.
I told you guys.
Phyllis.
Give it up for Cleo again, y'all.
No. Wow, I didn't know you thought all those things about me.
I know, it's hard to tell you sometimes, but now we get to do it in front of people, which is even better.
Yeah, I'm excited.
You guys are lucky enough to be Cleo's last stop of her book tour. How are you feeling about this being your last go?
You know, I hope to plan a couple more stops in the year, but it's different every time. And what I think what I feel the luckiest about is that come back to a lot of the same places and I see the same people, and I really do feel like my readers are my friends. Like I feel like just as much as I know that my best friend Kate Greer is going to be here, who I've been friends with for almost 20 years, and I usually stay at her house and I stay the night here. I also know that Farah is going to be here wherever she is, and there she is,
Right up front.
who has been, a reader and friend in my life since my first book, and through many cities, and so much so, Farah, that you're so deeply popular that every time I go to a city, someone says like, I'm friends with Farah, and I'm like, wow, that is like it's a very celebrity reader.
Love
So
that.
and so I love ending here because I do feel that I follow what goes on with people, and I know, and so it does feel more like a homecoming and a reunion in every city.
And what is so special about San Francisco in particular?
This being here especially, I feel like being in the Commonwealth Club, this was the first venue I went to where I was like, oh my gosh, I really wrote a book. It was the first time I even think I put on a little mic like this, and I still am like, what do I do with my hands? And I remember thinking that it felt very real. And I actually did my first talk here with my friend Kate, who's here almost 10 years ago. And so, not only is it amazing to just kind of come back and be like, wow, I remember thinking I felt so special and it felt so real that Heart Talk was in the world, because it was the first room where I remember being like, and Heart Talk had been out for a while, so it was the first time I'd been around readers who had the book. Some of the early stops, it was like kind of the day the book came out, and so it was kind of like, oh, I know your work, or I like it, or hi, and then they were like, oh my gosh, I've been living with Heart Talk in my life, and it's been in my bathroom, or on my bedside table, or in my bag, and people are showing me their copies, and so this venue is very special to me. And then San Francisco what's that quote that's like, being from someone from New Orleans, there's a quote that's like the only two kind of original cities in America are San Francisco and New Orleans. And
I have not heard that.
Yes, but it's like they're very soulful. I have like the things I always do when I come, if have the time, which is like I always go to City Lights, and you have these things that are just such quintessentially soulful experiences you can have here. And then third, my best friend's mom lives here. Is KK here yet? KK! And so...
Hey, how are you?
Love you. And so it really is a very family,
it's a family affair.
It's a family affair for me.
We're going to get more into the Heart Talk callbacks.
Ooh.
But you released Heart Talk at a very different moment in our politics and in our culture. And what really, just to start, what stuck with me in your introduction is you center so much of this on spirituality. Spirituality is a clear through line of this book. You write, to live with soul is to remember that spirituality includes life's pleasures. Soul is the birthplace of joy. And I'm really struck by how many times soul and spirit are woven throughout this book. And I actually noticed that there's only one time God is mentioned in the book, and it's when you quote the Serenity Prayer. And I'm wondering if you distinguish between the two, or what God looks like to you.
What's always most important to me as I'm writing is the experience of my reader. So I would never use language that I didn't feel. I don't want to be so vague that no one knows what I'm talking about and that it's for no one. Mm-hmm. But there is this fine line that you kind of write where you want it to feel universal enough that it can still be helpful. Because to me, everything I do has to be two things. It has to be useful and beautiful. And if it's not both of those things, even if it's, I spend as much time almost putting the pages together as I do writing the text that's in the page. And so to me, sometimes I think when you are too specific with your language around kind of the energy of that kind of universal energy, which we could call God, the universe, goddess, Jesus, Buddha, anything. I know I know, and I have the friends in my life where that would be the block. And I would never want to block something from being useful because of a single word. And so I am very particular about, and I call on spirit all the time. I mean, if you know my work, I reference that, I was even just thinking about this page the other day that's like, spirituality without practice is ego. Like, I think about like how spirit will tell you this and ego will tell you this, and spirit can be anything. And I think we all deeply know that there is something within and around us that is sparkly and something, because there's too many miraculous things happening for us to feel that, we know or man is doing or creating all of life's own beauty. And so I certainly, for me in my own practice, I certainly have a relationship to God, the universe, higher power, wider power. And I think for my reader, when I'm writing, I just want to make sure that I would never, I do look at my readers as my friends, and then in the same way that I wouldn't have somebody over at my house for dinner and impose an ideal on them, or an ideology on them, I don't do that in my writing.
So when you close your eyes and you're connecting to spirit, or maybe you're not closing your eyes, maybe you're at your typewriter, she doesn't use a laptop.
Eventually, I don't use a laptop, but yeah. Okay.
What does it feel like when you're connecting to spirit, or what does it look like, or what do you envision, or what helps you connect to spirit?
Well, as you know, I do a walk, and I live in a canyon in LA, and I do a walk of the canyon pretty much every day, and I call it kind of like my walk of awe. And I just notice kind of the beauty that's around us. And Simon always, like, the difference between my energy and Simon's, which, if you guys were here 2-3 years ago, Simon was in San Francisco with me last time, and I was like, Simon is like, wants to bring his phone on the walk and then and still be writing something, but he writes like fiction. So I do get that he's always in some world building and creating. So it's kind of always coming to him. And when you're kind of like world building the way he does, all these details really matter. And so I get it, but I'm kind of like, you cannot bring a phone around these trees. Like, I think it hurts their feelings. And so so I'm on there and I'm just like, oh, did you see the neighbor's roses are in bloom? Like, I turn into like a real older Southern woman. I feel like straight out of a scene of Steel Magnolias when I'm on my walk. I feel like Weezer. Yep. And so I feel most connected to spirit when I'm connected to nature, because in nature, we understand so much of our own patterns. And in nature, we have such a deep understanding of the wisdom of our own seasons. And I say that to people all the time, like, because I'll go to like the nail salon or something, and someone will sit next to me and be like, I just want to say one quick thing. I'm going through a divorce and something. And I'm like, okay. And I'm locked in and I'm ready. And for almost every single thing that someone could say to me about their life, I could tell them life is seasonal. Like, appreciate the season that you're in with whatever is happening to you. Ask yourself what season you're in as it's happening. And so sometimes if you're going through something like heartbreak, you're in a season where it's winter and you kind of need to be kind of cozied in and burrowed in, and that's okay. Or it feels like fall and you're kind of like, maybe you want to go on one nice walk because the breeze feels nice, but for the most part, you just have this really slow pace. Or, or maybe it's feeling like spring, and it's that feeling when you're in the city and the first nice day has happened and you just like need to go sit in the sun, or it's like summer and you just want to go nuts, like you did in your last breakup. And so
there it is.
And so but when you know what season you're in, you can be in the season, and you can be in the season without shame, and you can know that another season will come. And when you're connected to nature, you see that. And you also, there's a lot of fear that you can release because you can appreciate where you are. And so
Day 12, you write, time can be good to us, especially when we are not trying to outsmart it or obsessively control it. our lives unfold in their own divine way.
Yes. And I think living with that knowing, and a lot of the book is like, I don't think that I'm teaching anything. I think I'm revealing what we already know. And I hope giving my readers the confidence to just lean into where they are and know that it's okay. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the times we just don't do that, and that kind of lack of confidence for where we are or what we feel inclined to do. And we're just scared to follow our own intuition and scared to kind of listen to that wisdom we have within about ourselves. Or like, even when I think about certain pages from Heart Talk that resonate with people, and they're pages that say things like, who could know you better than you? And that is surprising for a lot of people. And I feel like even when I write it, when I wrote it, I still turn back to it, because I'll have times where I'll be like, oh, was that the right decision? Should I do this? Should I not? Da-da-da. And then I'm like, wait, hold on. Like, I'm actually the expert on myself. Like, I am the absolute expert on me. And so I have the authority to kind of quiet that motor and just say, yeah, that's fine, and I can move on now.
Totally. It's funny you bring up the canyon, because to me, this book is the embodiment of your California era. Like, this is your California book.
Really?
If you really even think about it, Heart Talk is like red. You know what I mean? It has a different energy to it, even as you're thumbing through it. This book is day by day.
Yeah.
It is quiet. It is about reflection, and it's meditations that you have given. And so much of it is about awe, humility, focus on things that are outside of the humdrum, that I don't think this book could have been written in New York City by Cleo. Yeah. And even the palette, it's yellow, it's floral. Like, this is a deeply California product.
Cool.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
And it reminded me.
Put that in my Goodreads review or whatever those are. I'm always getting something about like a Goodreads, and I'm like, what the hell is that?
No, it just reminded me of, you quote Alice Walker in here, and that's actually what triggered it for me when Shug Avery says, I think God, I'm paraphrasing, I think God would get really pissed off if you walked by a purple flower and didn't praise his creation. I feel like that's what this book is in so many ways. It's about these tiny little ways that make a big difference.
Yeah, and because it's almost, that's all we can know we can claim for sure in the day. Like, it just, when we're looking for, when the big stuff feels like it's going awry, and it was funny, some of my girlfriends, I had a group of girlfriends read from the book like Sherry did, and I'm so grateful that she did tonight, and in New York. And they kind of sat through it after, and I hung out with them the next day, and they were like, I did not realize so many people were going through it. and I was like, but we are. Like, I mean, we go through these really difficult things. We have these really giant things that we wish we could control, and we can't, like the president of the country, and you get stuck in these periods of not being able to change things that direly need to change. But knowing that there's probably something you can do to help someone until you can kind of turn that big ship. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it felt, again, like really useful and practical to take it one day at a time. Like, even my own mantra for writing the book was one day at a time, one breath at a time, mm-hmm. one step at a time. And if I didn't feel like every page could speak to that pace, I didn't put it in the book.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And let's close the loop on the Heart Talk piece, because there's two callbacks to Heart Talk in the book that I noticed. And mm-hmm. I just want to know a little bit more about the why. But maybe you answered it. One of them is you specifically call out the passage. Actually, I wonder how many people like jumped when they heard this one. Do you guys remember this one? Baby, you are the strongest flower that ever grew. Remember that when the weather changes. That was like, I transported back in time. Yes? Thank you, ma'am. And then on day 52, you wrote, one of the mantras I use most from Heart Talk is, remember not to care about the things you don't even care about. Why those two pieces of advice from your past?
I mean, Heart Talk, before I when I was here last, I was really reminded of about how much Heart Talk meant to people. And I took that, and I really took that to heart, because I was here with Remember Love, and Remember Love, and I really love that book, and I'm so proud of that book. And this book feels so truly like a sister to Heart Talk, whereas I feel like Remember Love feels more like a cousin to Heart Talk. And
I think it's the auntie.
Auntie, okay.
It felt more like, yeah.
I like it, auntie. And
well, do you guys agree?
And so, but it didn't have that, in that moment, and it was a really big moment for me of taking in feedback and really wanting to, and I sat with it for like 6 months, and because I realized how much Heart Talk and the tone of Heart Talk and the way it was written and the ease of like the page flow, everything about it, I realized how helpful that kind of energy and format was. Mm-hmm. And I really like it kind of like made it kind of that the feedback kind of challenged me to say like, well, I really want I want to be able to give people that extension, because I feel like I live with the extension of Heart Talk because I feel that every page of my books are an extension of my personality. Like part of why I can't really tour, I can only really tour with my close friends, even if, half the people on my tours have never moderated anything ever. But, I don't really have like a stage persona and that like I don't switch or have a, if anything, I kind of have like stage fright. So, and so I felt that I was living with this kind of like energy of Heart Talk and I had more to contribute to that space.
Yeah.
And
like a canon almost.
Yes. And so I wanted to bring to life something that was even more thorough in the sense of like, it didn't have to mean that like the wording was more dense, which is like, I wanted to create something more thorough with Remember Love, but I wanted to do it in a way where it's like kind of made it even a little bit more complex or a little bit, the tone is slightly different. And so here I really wanted to say like, no, I hear you. And now I'm going to like, I'm listening and I want to really up the ante and give you that energy every single day. And I want to do it in a way that's even more practical and instructive. And in that, so because of that conversation, I'd reread Heart Talk for the first time in, a long time.
Wow.
And so I reread it, and there's very little in this book that is derivative from any of my other writing, but I did kind of take probably maybe 1 or 2 pages from each of my books, even my kids' books. There's a book on weirdness in here that's from one of the kids' books, because I just felt that message was so important and I wanted to expand on it in a different way.
Yeah.
And then those two, Baby You're the Strongest Flower That Ever Grew is to date probably the most popular thing I've ever written. I mean, even when I was in New York, someone had like needle stitched it on something and gave it to me. And I know it was so sweet. And so, and I've seen it tattooed, and I've seen that work live far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And so I actually wanted to create a page that was just a tribute to the way that people have held that text in such a sacred way. And for Remember Not to Care About the Things You Don't Even Care About, I actually just practically use that mantra so much and have pretty much every day for 10 years.
Totally.
I truly have things, and I know I'm not alone in that feeling where all of a sudden something's like running through your head on something and you're like, I don't even care about this. Like, what am I like? And you just have to create that internal boundary to like stop burning energy on it. And to me, I like to use mantras to remind me where my boundaries need to be and currently aren't. So like the mantras to me, they're like kind of like the manifestation page that Sherry read. My mantras aren't kind of like, and I say these mantras and then things appear or like my life changes. I use them like as kind of way to replace a thought that I no longer want, but you can't just be like, oh, don't think that. Like, don't think, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. Like you kind of do have to replace the thought with something. Even if it's like, you're just kind of saying it over and over again until it just completely pulls you out of the mud of the other thought.
Yes.
And then other ones I have are just to create the firm boundaries. So like, that's kind of when some of my work is a little sassier. I'd say that, remember not to care about the things you don't even care about. It kind of lands and just says like, you know what, Cleo, stop it. Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. And I've seen that happen for you in your personal practice too, for sure. Because the one thing that I observed that as your friend, that feels like the biggest, not shift, but I think the firmer articulation this time around is there's so much in here about how to hold boundaries as a practice of love.
Yep.
And I think your articulation of love as both a fence and a bridge is super, super powerful. And I was sort of wondering as I was going through, when you write about how you can't give too much to friendships that sort of like can become energy vampires, even if you really care about the person, right? You have to care about yourself. How much of this writing for this book felt like something you needed to hear versus felt like something you wanted the world to hear?
I don't think I've ever written something that I didn't need or feel was helpful to me or to one of my friends. Having now talked about this book with 5 or 6 friends publicly since it came out, all of them have been like, and I know you wrote that page right after we were on the phone. And so, and I'm like, I did.
I know. I want a cut. I want some royalty.
And so and it's not in the sense of, I don't kind of ever, as anyone who knows my work knows, I don't like go into the details of anything, but when something comes up and sometimes when I'm in conversation with one of my friends and they're going through something, you feel the relief that certain words give them. So like when you're talking to them and you're just listening and then you're kind of reflecting back what you're hearing or what you're feeling about what they're saying or what you think might be helpful, 8 times out of 10, they're probably just being like, yeah, but da-da-da-da, yeah, but da-da-da. And then all of a sudden, there'll be the one thing you kind of say and, say back to them that this shifts something in them, and you feel it. Like you can feel it in their body, you can feel it in their breathing, you can feel it in that. They'll be like, "Huh, yeah, thank you," and that is usually something where I'm like, that's going to help somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I was really moved by your intro because I don't, and I've always said this since my first book 7 books ago. I don't wake up in the morning and think like, oh my gosh, my greatest skill is that I'm a writer. I really think that the thing I work the hardest at, my greatest skill, is that I do feel that I put my all into friendship. And I actually remember when I had my first kid, thinking, oh, I feel like I didn't feel scared. I felt prepared because I just felt so prepared to be able to like hold the space and take someone as they are and not want to impose myself on them, because I've had so much practice in doing that with friendships and not want to be overly controlling or all of these things, because I feel that I have put my all into being a friend to so many people. And that being the baseline of how I raise daughters, it just gave me kind of a confidence in going into it. And so I think as I, write this book and write about the boundaries or these, and I certainly need those pages, but they also really helped my friends. And even as I developed them and some of them are things that, mirrors or reflections my friends held up to me. Like I'd never, I've of course heard of like energy vampires, but my friend, our very dear friend Stevie, like she was the first time I ever heard somebody call someone like a moth. And I'd never even considered the idea that and it feels like it's obvious, I don't know, but I just had never heard it. And so it's just this idea of somebody who's just there to do nothing but like be on your light and do nothing else. And I just hadn't thought about the nothing else part. Of course, I'd known that like a moth is attracted to light, but I think sometimes you're so busy thinking about the light and not the moth. And so you think about the attraction, like the energy pull, and that energy pull just feels like it makes sense. And you're so busy almost like congratulating the light that you don't think of the energy of the moth. Mm-hmm. And so even in this, as I wrote about, what experiencing different people and then being like, wow, yes, some people it is a moth because they don't give to the light and they don't hold anything, they don't bring, they don't amplify. They're just there being this kind of like thing that's taking.
Yeah.
And so, which is also different than an energy vampire. And so I had a lot of kind of fun in the book also taking those lessons from my friends and then creating distinctions that I felt would be helpful because they were helpful to me.
There's, on day 221, you wrote, "Are things falling apart or falling away?" And it reminded me of a conversation that we had at some point during your third trimester for Magnolia, where you kind of said, I simply don't have time to deal with anything that is not important.
Yeah.
And what has been interesting is watching or witnessing, because I'm sure you feel overwhelmed all of the time.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is watching how motherhood sharpened your creative instinct and also forced you, I guess, in a way, to prioritize almost in a ruthless way what mattered or what you were willing to give time or energy for. I think we often hear about parenting as something that is distracting, but actually it felt like parenting in this context was clarifying. You wrote this book while you were pregnant. You were editing it while you were breastfeeding a newborn. You you pumped while we were on the way to this talk, right? There's so much that motherhood has done to change, I think, or even evolve some of these perspectives. You referenced The Wizard of Oz. I counted 3 times, but I think it might be more throughout the book, and that obviously is very Memphis and Bayou.
Loves The Wizard of Oz.
Exactly. I felt the girls everywhere, and there was a ton in here about the inner child.
Yeah.
And so this book is also, as much as about California and nature, there's also a book written very much by a mom.
I would say certainly the maternal energy is there, but the only thing I'm gonna like poke at that you just said is when you said sometimes almost ruthlessly so, because the only person who thinks boundaries are ruthless are the people who benefit from no boundaries being present. Mm. And in whether it's motherhood, whether it's moving, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a new job, every big thing in your life, if you are paying attention to yourself during a major shift or change, you will go through a shed. And so much of that page of are things falling apart or falling away, I wanted it to feel like, if like falling apart is like, like I wanted it to be like falling away is like that Nicole Kidman when she's like signing those divorce papers, that meme. But it's like, it's literally like your shoulders are back and everything's like, it's falling away. It's rolling off of you like water. You are okay. And, the big changes I'd gone through, in the past few years was obviously having kids and moving. But when I reflected on the idea of these periods of shedding, and they are so necessary, you upset a lot of people. And I think if you have that kind of people pleaser thing that so many of us are trying to recover from, because, people like, everyone wonders like, how do we become people pleasers? But it starts by being like, well, I'm trying to be lovable, and then I'm trying to search for like all the things that make one more lovable, whether that's on the macro of what society tells me is more lovable, which is perhaps how I look or how I dress or how I talk or who I'm with or my status in this way or whatever, does that make me more worthy of belonging, right? Or in the micro of our household, did as long as I was quiet and not inconvenient, I was more lovable to my parents. As long as I was chose my dad's side in an argument or a divorce, was I more lovable to that? Was I only lovable to that parent? We have all of these different relationships with being lovable. And then I think that kind of energy starts to create a really big pattern of people pleasing. Mm-hmm. And then we find ourselves in these relationships where when we go through change, we have a change of experience then creates a change of needs. And when our needs change, we find out who was not servicing or in a space of reciprocity with the first needs that we had, or the kind of original set of needs there, because they certainly can't kind of hang with us through our evolved needs. Mm. And so when I've gone through changes over the last years, I'll have things where, there were people where you're really close for 5 years, 20 years. And then all of a sudden, for me, when I was writing this book, I was adding another kid to the mix. And now I have 3 daughters. And I remember, and I remember calling you to talk to you about this too. I remember being like, gosh, I was just thinking about who in my life, if I don't call them, there is no relationship. And if I don't make sure that I'm the one who's kind of bringing the structure or facilitating or being there, then there is no relationship. And I don't know, now that I have so many children, I can invest in that relationship. And I think that that's just real. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to put that in the book because I kind of, I wish I would have had that, I try to think of all of these pages as little permission slips. And so I kind of wish I would have had that permission slip, not only when I had my first kid, but I don't know, when I first moved to New York. And I just remember thinking, wow, I don't know if I actually feel a true connection with any of my girlfriends from high school. And I feel really lucky that I have, my best friend from Little League, and I still have my group chat of my 7th grade homeroom. And I'm so grateful for those relationships. But I didn't realize that and I remember talking to my therapist about it, and he's like, well, taking one person from each generation of your, or each decade of your life is pretty good, 1 to 2 people. And now I feel that at this stage of my life, I feel really lucky if as I look back at, I do have my one friend from year 0 to 10. I have my 2 from, 10 to 20. I have my handful from my 20s. And as I, keep going, I'm seeing more, what will be taken with me into my next decade. And so.
That's good advice. I've never heard it articulated that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me feel better too. Well, you come out of the closet. It's hard to keep up with all those people. You don't kind of want to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The other piece of maternal advice I wanted to visit was on day 79. You wrote, "There is no such thing as tough love. Love is durable, but never tough. Its strength is lasting and powerful, but always tender. Always, always tender." How do you distinguish between tough love and durable love when you are dealing with your partner or your daughters?
There's a Lucille Clifton book, and there's a line in the book where she kind of writes something around the idea of our relationships are a line and they last and last and last. Because these lines last for infinity. And our friend Stevie sent me that book from a thrift store, and someone inscribed it to their close friend and said it, to Charlene in 1982 or whatever.
Is this Generations?
Generations, yes. And it says, "We last and last and last." And she wrote it to one of her friends. And when I think about being durable, I think about, what are the ways we can last and last and last. There's a lot of things, whether it's talking about anger, I talk about the importance of anger in this book. And I always give pause in speaking about it to make sure that we distinguish between anger and violence, and that anger, anger is powerful and information, and it's a fire, and that fire is a light, and that is important, and that's how we know what we care about. And so much of how we don't embrace ourselves has to do with the emotions we refuse to feel, and anger is a key feeling. And I talk about how jealousy is also incredibly important. It can direct you to what you want. We could live in such gratitude for jealousy. We can say like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for showing me that that's something I really want or I'm really interested in. But when we hang in it for too long and in the wrong way, then it becomes toxic, and we kind of toxify these emotions, and they become unhelpful, right? If you hang in anger to where it becomes violence, then anger ceases to become helpful, right? And so when writing about tough love, I also always quote Bell Hooks and this idea of making sure that we define love and all the qualities of love. And it being tough is never really a quality that anyone would probably define it as. They wouldn't be like, oh, yes, and I want it to be really like rough and tumble. And you'd be like, what? It's scary. That's scary. Oh, Phil. And, but you would say, if Bell Hooks' definition should be like, care, responsibility, accountability, listening.
Which are not soft words, but they're not tough words.
Yes. And also like there is so much of what we're trying to do to get to the love we have for ourselves and kind of break the stuff around it so that we can feel it tenderly is to pick apart the ways in which society explain things to us incorrectly. We've all watched movies or read books or seen things our whole lives where, we all know the words tough love, or like we've even probably said it before, like, oh, they just need a little tough love, or we've heard it and thought it was fine, And so it's kind of like my daughters were recently watching Grease, which was weird because they're 4 and 6, and that movie is wild, but the songs still slap. So, but it's really funny because
Grease is a crazy movie.
No, it's insane.
Okay.
It's insane. But they love musicals, and I love that they love musicals. Bye Bye Birdie.
There's a lot of musicals.
No, Bye Bye Birdie is also insane.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
It's
Moana, maybe. Just in the background.
It wasn't doing the same for them.
Got it. Okay.
But in the movie, they're like, "You're cruising for a bruising," and I just remember being like, "Wow!" Like, but that's so insane. But we've heard that throughout our lifetimes. Like, I've heard that said, or like, and I think that's kind of you're laughing because I'm quoting Grease.
I'm just waiting for it to get to the point.
No.
Yeah.
Tough love, cruising for a bruising.
Got it. Okay. Go on.
All that to say, and my point is, no, but my point is, I remember thinking, I said cruising for a bruising throughout my life, and then I was like, whoa, that's crazy because I had to witness it through it. My daughters are learning words and phrases, and then you're like, well, I'm not going to teach you that word and phrase, right? Mm-hmm. And so my point is that when we talk about tough love, there's so many things I try not to, that strike me in even the ways in which it flows in our vocabulary or in the kind of depictions of love, or, every, coach movie or whatever is about the coach giving tough love or what, and calling it that. And so I wanted to create pages that really break down those ideas because I don't feel like they're helpful. And so that's the point of the page.
I actually think that's no, I'm being serious. I think that's incredibly profound. When I went, Cleo was the one who told me to apply to divinity school. I now work at Playboy, so again, let's not dive too deep into it. But
you went all the way to Harvard.
And I went to Harvard at her recommendation. But one of the first things that we had to agree upon in our seminar for the Masters of Religion and Public Life was that violence is actually not a part of the human condition. And it was that peace is a part of the natural human condition. And it was the hardest thing. We spent a whole seminar arguing with the professor about it. Her standing in front of a classroom of young people, arguing with us that we are not naturally inclined to violence. And it has stayed with me, and it's all over your book. Day 47, you write, violence has no home in our hearts. A more peaceful world always begins with more peaceful people. You also write later in the book that dark times require deep imagination. We are on the brink of World War III. We have a president who is basically threatening genocide of another population and nuclear warfare potentially. It is hard to cling to hope of the human condition. What is your wellspring of hope? Why do you believe in us so much?
Well, the reason I made the subtitle of this book, 365 Days of Heart, Soul, and Hope, was because I found that to be the kind of magic 3. Because if heart is these connections we make that feel so deep and loving, and whether that's the connection we have to ourselves, that are these heartful connections, I knew that to me made it easier to get through the day, right? Soul being kind of life's like sparkle. This, a lot of the pages are about enjoying music or sitting in the park or dancing whenever you feel the need to dance, and really enjoying, as you said in the intro, life's pleasures. And then hope is kind of this, where I'd say the spirit comes in, where you believe that things can be better. And I'd say that you believe it can be better because you believe that we are worth it. And I think this idea that we believe that we are worth a better world. And I think that a lot of the times when we do not feel connected to hope, it's because we no longer feel we're worth it. And so when all 3 of those come together, I feel like, when we go and we listen to music and people are dancing, and it couldn't matter less like where you're from or what you've done or who you are or whatever, but everyone's singing the same song or cheering for the same team. It's hard not to feel like we are worth it. Like we aren't worth something better. We aren't worth better politics. We aren't worth better policy. We aren't worth a better world. When you're walking by and you see 2 people taking their wedding photos by the sea or whatever, or you're like seeing these like 2 kids holding hands and you see these heartful, beautiful connections, it's hard to believe that we aren't worth it. And then I think also when you see people standing up for what is right, or, you see the Pope or, speaking truth to power, and you see these everyday acts of kind of courageous, moral clarity, it's hard not to feel that we aren't worth it. And so to me, everything in the book kind of had to tie into those 3. And that's what I tried to do.
I want to close my version of the questions. I have a bunch here from your readers.
Okay, I'm excited.
But I do want to close with the callback to how we opened, which was with Sherry's passage, which was about manifestation. And there's a lot in this book. Manifestation is not a genie granting a wish or a thought that magically becomes reality without any effort. You also write about dreams needing discipline effectively in order to come true. I found it a really helpful antidote to the new age podcast, video, armchair faux expert who's secretly anti-vax, who is spreading misinformation or delivering a message in a really black and white and sort of polarized way in order to attract a cult following, which is sort of, I do look at you as like the antithesis of that leader.
As I sit here in an armchair. No, as you know, that I won't do those types of
I know
things.
that. Yeah, I think it's interesting for everyone else to know.
Because
You're one today.
I really do believe in having kind of moderation with how we kind of move through things, and giving pause and being gentle and staying curious without going kind of like, I've just never personally gone overboard into one thing and then not kind of been kind of like come out of it later and been like, oh, that was weird. Do you know? And so as I was writing this book, a lot of what I tried to do was say like, okay, well, here's the kind of way to take care of your feelings about the thing you want. And then here's like the practical thing. So if I was writing about relationships, I'd say, well, love can be unconditional, but relationships are extremely conditional. And that's kind of the practical way of being in relationships, while also valuing the spiritual feeling of really loving and caring for someone. And I wouldn't want to dismiss that. And so I think.
Go on, finish your thought.
Finish your thought. Okay. And so I think I just try to not create necessarily like a balance between the two, because I don't know that, or I guess I try to create a harmony between the two. And so even if I'm talking about hope, I have my friend Duray's quote in the book on hope that says, hope is the belief that our tomorrows can be better than our todays. It's not magic, it's work. And then I also have lines about hope being a feeling, the feeling that we're worth it, right? The feeling that we like believe that magic is here, that awe creates, that there's miracles happening every day, even in the midst of tragedy. And so I think having this, and to me, that just felt, I don't know, it felt like a more generous offering, because ultimately it wasn't about like all roads leading back to me. And I don't believe that I am somebody who, is like, I have every answer, but I do and will always enjoy living in the questions and trying to offer up what I'm kind of like distilling from our wonderings. And I always hope to do that in a gentle way where you feel like you could pick it up or put it down, and that there's no shame in however you interact with it. But I think a lot of the kind of like culture that you're talking about, I feel like there's a lot of shame of like, you're not getting it right. Or, even when I first started writing poetry, I was so drawn to it because I didn't feel like you could do it wrong. And I felt like you could be a writer, and because it was a poem, there was like freedom for it to look however, the spacing could look however, you could like choose that, the grammar you wanted to use as poetic license. And I just love the idea of kind of approaching spirituality with that type of poetic license.
I love it. Thank you. You guys wrote a lot of great questions. I'm going to try and get to as many as I can, but thank you so much for the generosity and attention here. There's two that are sort of similar, which is on a similar vein to what we're on, so I want to stay here for a sec while we're in this mindset. One references that we're in a pivotal moment historically and socially, and this person is wondering how we balance personal needs against and or with the need to serve and the responsibility to help others. And the other actually strikes a similar tone, which is how do we pay attention to the world while being mindful of all the noise and find what we can to uniquely nurture and contribute. What strikes you from those?
This question was also asked when I was in DC.
It's a good place for it.
Yeah. And I told them the story of when I was in 2018, I got to spend a lot of time with John Lewis, and
amazing.
He would and I went on the road with him one day to a few towns in Atlanta, and I got to in Georgia, and he kind of told the story about how during the civil rights movement, because it was a nonviolent movement, he's like, we didn't just like decide to be nonviolent. He's like, it was a practice. We would practice nonviolence. And so you could also have a day, and it's funny because my friend Duray, who did that talk with me, sent me something today, which was a young girl in 1964 sitting still while someone blew cigarette smoke in her face, and she was practicing. And it was a training session for nonviolence that she was in, which was like, what do you do? Like, can you maintain your composure and your nonviolent, peaceful energy in the face of someone blowing smoke at you and cursing at you? And that always, and that idea always struck me because there's two things he said that struck me, which is that, and then he would also say that he, it's okay.
Didn't listen to my opening remarks.
And everyone always thinks their phone is on silent, to be fair.
Mine's
They're
not.
like so sure. KK, I did this with Nicole 2 nights ago in LA, and her alarm to feed her dogs went off in the middle of the conversation. And she goes, "Oh, sorry, that's just the alarm to feed my dogs." And
Take care of yourself, you know what I mean?
And he talked about nonviolence, and the other thing he would talk about is when people would be like mean to him or spitting at him or all these things, he would imagine them as a baby, and he would wonder, what went wrong, kind of like. You're just like imagining like Donald Trump's disgusting face on a baby.
And people draw him as a baby often in cartoons, so
But he would say like, we would envision them as a baby and just wonder like what went wrong. Was it the environment that did this to them? Like, because like everyone starts out as this like perfect baby, and, I have a 4-month-old right now. And so, holding her, it's like, it's so hard to consider that like what could possibly happen to our children for their hearts to become so corrupted, and their actions to become so violent. And so I think part of self-care can also be like, well, what are things I can visualize or understand like that? Like that's self-care, what he was just describing, right? Like,
yes.
He's like, I'm taking care of myself mentally by knowing that I'm in this situation that I cannot get out of, which is that all of these people are, separating me from society, being violent towards me, trying to ensure that I don't have rights, trying to harm me, do not want me to exist. And I'm just in this right now. And right now that is not changing, but what can I do for myself to bear this? And still like be the person I want to be in the face of this. And then as it pertains to the nonviolence, he'd say that, someone would come and if they were having a bad day and they went to a protest, but they could feel that their energy was kind of hot and heated, he would say, well, no, you can't come today because like you're not in like the space of nonviolence. And so I think knowing what is when you really spend time with yourself to know what is the quality of the type of person I want to be. And that's the person I want to bring into the world, especially when I call for peace. I can know if that person is available right now. And it has the week happened? Like, did I commit to that protest too far in advance? And if the quality of the type of person, of like the quality of my personhood is not where it needs to be at the protest, and that energy is not right either.
Totally.
And so, and how helpful could that possibly be? And so, because help does need to feel helpful. Yes. And it does need to be helpful. If not, it is just kind of like effort mixed with this kind of obligatory, resentful energy. And it's kind of, in the book, I talk a lot about, the quality of generosity. Like if the generosity doesn't feel good, you're not doing generosity right. You're actually just, there's the line someone told me this once, wanting to give is still wanting. Like you're actually, there's something you want, there's like, you're too much on the map. If your generosity, if you're thinking about, the ways in which someone did or did say thank you to the thing you offered, like, it should feel like that dollar you gave and then you just kept going. And if you're kind of still in there mentally, then like the generosity isn't flowing. And so I think we can think about that with our own personhood as far as how we give to this environment, because our world and our, society does need us, and it does need us to kind of be connected, but we need to be open for connection and the right connections. Because also we all know what it's like to go through a weird period of time in our lives and then have all these connections during that weird period. And then when you're out of the weird period, you're like, oh my gosh, like this whole vibe is like negative and dark and weird. Like I could almost always tell if I was in a funky place, because I can be like, oh my gosh, I was spending a lot of time with that person and it was kind of, their energy was funky. And then all my friends will be like, we tried to tell you.
Okay, wait, I hate to move this along. We have 5 minutes left. So we're going to do a rapid fire series because these are all really good. And I kind of want longer answers, but it's okay.
Okay.
On a more upbeat note than current affairs, what do you think happens when we die?
I hope what happens is that, you always read about people talk about how a universe is within us, and we are made of stardust, and I really believe that. And so my hope, and then of course, I could be thinking of this because of the space mission that just came home, but I hope that we kind of return to the sky and light up this world in like the most natural possible way, as the stars and the sun, and because I certainly feel, I've never met somebody who didn't feel that connection or didn't go to one of these places in the world where there's very few kind of, modern lights, and then you see all the stars and they're so bright and they're so vibrant, and you don't just feel so deeply moved. And so my hope is that, we return to the stars.
What is your favorite place in the world to watch the sunrise, and who are you with?
To watch the sunrise. I am not a morning person.
That's a perfect answer. When was the last time you experienced awe?
I actually, so right before we landed and went to this like dive bar to eat Chinese food called, what was it called, Kate? The Rabbit Hole. And we walked in and it was completely empty because it's like 3 p.m. But it was like truly exactly what I needed, was to just like sit in an empty restaurant. And then it kind of like Kate filled in, and then Phil came late because his flight. And I just got to like really eat a really nice, warm, like Chinese food. And I was like, wow, I was like in a gratitude spiral just sitting in there. And I was in awe that like I could just be delivered the exact thing that I needed before coming here.
All right, last one. What is the one
Is
thing?
all always something big and beautiful, or it can't be like an empty dive bar?
No, that was perfect. What is the one thing you appreciated about your mother after you became a new mother for the first time?
I really appreciated all of the things, so we don't kind of pause often and think of the things we get from our parents that aren't like, so with my mom, I didn't realize that she's such a host, and I love to host. Like sometimes we think about our parents, we'll be like, oh, you have their smile, or you have their this. And I started to really see the ways that my mom kind of organized her life that was similar to that I felt like a connection to. And I was like, oh yes, like you want to have everyone over for Thanksgiving, I want to have everyone over for Thanksgiving. Like if my mom's in town, the first thing she says is like, who's coming over? And and so I really appreciated that I'd kind of like that Baldwin quote that I quote often, that is like, we never listen to our parents, we never fail to imitate them. I was really moved by a lot of the ways in which I imitate her, and I didn't know.
Oh, beautiful. Give it up for Cleo Wadia.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
It's very cool. Phil's so professional. No, he's like he's my only friend that's a journalist. And so I was like, whoa, this is very serious.
I did my best. Hopefully not too serious. What happens now? We're going to go off stage. And Cleo's going to do pictures with all of you. Yay! Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Oh, wait, hold on. Is my mic still on? Should I read one poem from the book? I'm so sorry. I forgot. Sorry. But which one? I really like to read this poem, so I'm going to read it. I've read it at like every stop. Okay. And I'm standing. Okay. This is on day 15, and it's called Rich. Rich is, I woke up and everything in this body worked for the most part. Rich is summertime and peaches are in season. Rich is okay. Talk to you later. I love you. Bye. Rich is here. Have some of mine, and let me help you with that. Rich is free concerts in the park, sandwiches, and the secret wine we share in our paper cups. It's sleeping late on a rainy morning. It's snuggles, it's coffee, it's leftovers that taste better the next day. Rich is just calling to say I made it home safe. Okay, I love you. Bye. Thank you guys. I'm gonna cry. Thank you so much.